Welcome, acolytes. Today I am reacting to legendary drops. Steam is forcing developers to be honest. Doesn't sound bad to me, but hey. And I also heard something that Steam is actually cracking down on some things, but to what degree I don't know. But I also understand why, because well, if you make a bad game, Steam suffers under it, so they should crack it down. And also, I think that if this is the thing that I think it is, and they crack down as I heard it is, then it's not the worst thing for the consumer. So, let's just start.
Transparency is the only thing that I could ever ask for, because at the end of the day, I just want to know what it is I'm actually buying and whether or not I'm actually going to get it. And you
Oh my, who doesn't? Who doesn't? Acolytes, please tell me also on that, because the transparency thing is something that a lot of actual game devs ignore.
guys know exactly what I'm talking about here. DLCs, season passes, roadmaps, false promises, false advertising, content that's never even delivered, or in some cases, content that we purchased, played, and then was later taken away from us. Never going to forget that, Bungie.
I am still baffled that this is legal somehow. I I am so baffled because I tried to actually sue Ubisoft with what was it? I don't even remember what it was. Yeah, it was about an update. I don't remember. I think it was something about For Honor that they didn't deliver something they didn't came out, and the judge, not the judge, my basically my lawyer just said nope, you have no chance. That's fine, they can do that. And I am just, since then it was basically a fun thing for me. It was like, I'm gonna for myself if I can, and if I can maybe I do some money out of it. But nah, it's not that easy in Germany.
We live in somewhat troubling times where we don't know what the future of these games is going to look like. We don't know what the future of our purchases are going to look like because we don't own those things anymore, and they can just kind of change that on the fly. But that doesn't stop them from asking us for more money. We've seen some games that have come out over the last few years that have fallen flat on their face. Games that players had purchased and only within a few months had completely fallen apart. Studios shut down, servers shut down, and the players are the ones that are sitting there still holding the bag, and there's no recourse for that. That's a problem. There should be laws that are in place to protect the players from these kind of things. But the very archaic design of our laws across the world when it comes to video games, and there's a lot of companies that are out there that are taking advantage of that. But Steam is here.
Yep, and this is something that I also full-heartedly agree. It's he puts it so perfectly. Archaic laws. It's
to say no more. No, they're going to say if you're going to false advertise your games or if you're not going to meet your deadlines, then you're going to force our hand and we're going to keep you in line. And while they shouldn't be the ones to have to do this, I'm happy they are, because this is a huge win for consumers. This is a massive step in the right direction for consumer protections, and there needs to be more of it. And this is going to have some huge implications in the future, and that's what I want to talk about today. But before that, today's sponsor. Are you ready for an MMORPG experience that doesn't hold your hand, challenges you, and brings you back to the glory days? Well, Core Punk is here, and it's coming into early access November 26th. This has always been a game that I've been excited to see what it turns into, and luckily the folks over at Artificial Core gave me a chance to check it out while it's still in early development. Core Punk gives me a nostalgic feeling that I haven't had in years for MMOs. It doesn't hold your hand or tell you where to go. The combat is challenging when you're taking on higher level enemies. The classes are unique, and I really like the direction that the game is heading in. Core Punk is an isometric open-world MMORPG that blends the best of MMORPGs, MOBAs, and ARPGs into a seamless experience. With the world shrouded in fog of war, it combines exploration, strategy, and MOBA-style combat into something truly unique. Whether you're into PvE or PvP, you'll find session-based game modes from solo and party instances to battlegrounds and extraction missions. Core Punk also features deep character progression with 8 passive talent branches and weapon customization systems that let you create unique builds tailored to whatever your playstyle is. Crafting is robust, with early game materials staying relevant throughout the entire game, plus the combat has been finely tuned to deliver skill-based, responsive action that feels satisfying with every hit. With early access launching November 26th, you'll have access to 3 biomes, 12 worlds, 6 classes, with another one added monthly, and a ton of content.
I'm gonna be honest, I just wanted to see what it is. Is it just a handy game? Because this looks actually remotely fun?
Cyberpunk uses a buy-to-play model with cosmetic-only monetization. No pay-to-win nonsense here. Just a fun, fair experience for everybody. Early access launches November 26. Use my link
Core Punk.
in
Okay.
the description below to register now. Let's help them make the game that we want to play. As more games have released as either live service games or platforms for future content, there is a growing concern of whether or not we are actually going to get the money out of our purchases on these games and how easily players can be taken advantage of. Looking back at the past year with
Okay, I cannot find Core Punk on Steam, so... And yes, still agreeing with him. It's a really good thing of Steam to actually do this stuff. That's good.
the release of Redfall, that was a game with a planned live service and had a roadmap for future DLC, and of course, as many games do, they tacked on a premium edition that promised more content in the future. The idea behind buying these season passes that are included with these games is so that the player can save money down the road and invest in a continued experience. I mean, it's the very reason why you're buying a game like this to begin with. You plan to continue to play it,
Correctly.
not just play it a single time
That's
and
true.
walk away. So the question becomes,
And not just that, it's also the mere fact that if you invest time in something, and be it a young calculator or an older one, especially the older ones, if you invest time in something, most of the time you actually think about what you're investing time in. Because even these days, I mean, I am literally every day between doing these videos or eating because my time schedule is so narrow. And I also want at least an hour a day for me just. And it's just tough. It's just tough.
what happens when a game fails to follow through on that promise? Is there any contingencies in place, anything to protect the consumer? Well, in the case of Redfall, when they stopped development and they closed down the studio and shut down the servers, players who had purchased the season pass for the game had got a refund. They got their money back.
At least
However,
something.
This was them just doing good on the side of the players, not necessarily following an established rule that's put in place.
Yep.
And while some developers are going to respect that, not all have. In fact, I have been a victim of this. Going back to the release of Evolve back in 2015, they sold a bundled version of the game with the season pass as well as selling it separately, and the game struggled to maintain a player base. And after a while, they had a hard time even releasing new content. They ended
Yeah, by the way, Evolved it just wasn't that. It had, the concept was pretty good, but it missed something. I don't know. The essence of Evolved just wasn't there in my opinion.
up scrapping their model altogether and transitioned the game to free-to-play without offering any refunds for the base game or the season pass. Ultimately, the game
And
was
by the
shut
way,
down
I
soon
believe-
after, but there are more
I believe wholeheartedly that buy and play is the way to go, and for long-running MMOs or big games like that actually have server costs. How's it called? Like people, they have to pay actually people, like not just the freaking game masters. I mean everyone behind it. You have to pay all of them. You really have to find out new stuff. For that, a monthly based paid thing is also very, very good. Because at any time you can just stop playing. It is what it is. But as it is right now, you just get fucked over every fucking time, and then people are just wondering why nobody wants to buy games. And one time buying games, I mean, just see Baldur's Gate 3. Like, one of the freaking best games ever. Okay. Fine. No bullshit behind it. Fine.
examples throughout history that are just like this. PC Games End published an article written by Jamie Orr titled, "Valve's New Rules Will Finally Hold Season Pass DLC to Account." In a move to make sure that developers and publishers don't stray from their promises and commitments when it comes to season passes, Steam is tightening up their guidelines. Newly spotted documentation from Valve outlines how season passes must give a release date to all DLC included, describe what's in each piece of a DLC, and much more. A data mine earlier this year hinted that such a change was coming to Valve's storefront, and now it's official Steamworks documentation, which is essentially the handbook for anyone wanting to list their content on Steam, has now been updated with the new section dedicated to season passes. The brand new page clearly defines season passes as a purchasable item of DLC with the promise of future content to be delivered to customers, either as a separate DLC releases or as additional content is unlocked within the base game. Alongside some guidance of how to properly set up a Season Pass page on Steam, Valve issues several warnings and new rules about what's needed in a Season Pass listing. The first big one revolves around the release schedule for Season Pass content. In the process of launching a Season Pass, you will be asked to commit to a launch timing for each content release in a Season Pass. That launch timing is a commitment to both customers and Steam. If you aren't ready to clearly communicate about the content included in each DLC and when each DLC will be ready for launch, you shouldn't offer a Season Pass on Steam. In the new guidance, which was spotted by Pavel Dudnik, the creator of the tracking site SteamDB, Valve also lays out its expectations when it comes to release schedules. Quarter of the year, i.e. January to March 2025, or season/year is acceptable. Of course, a date that's more precise is fine, i.e. June 2025.
I mean, fair enough. Fair enough. That's... fair enough. We won't get anything better, so...
25 or June 1st, 2025. It also now asks that each piece of DLC content comes with a brief description of what's included. There is some wiggle room in that developers and publishers can self-reschedule the release date one time only if a piece of Season Pass content is going to be delayed. However, Valve also stipulates that they can only pick a new date that's up to 3 months later than what you originally...
Okay, that's actually quite fair. 3 months isn't that much for a developer, because normally if push comes to shove, you have way bigger problems than that. But I think that this is fair. This sounds really, really fair. Even the one-time thing where you can say, okay, you can push it back to maximum of 3 months, fair enough. I would accept it. As long as it's a good game, I would accept it.
Selected. It also says that if a piece of DLC intended to be released in a Season Pass is canceled, customers will be offered a refund for the value of that individual piece of content. The refund promise may also be applied if a piece of DLC content is delayed by more than the 3-month threshold.
Okay.
Valve states that even if there has not yet been a customer complaint, Valve may take action if you delay a DLC more than 3 months beyond the release window you originally promised. Actions include removing the Season Pass from sale on Steam, refunding all customers who purchased the Season Pass for the value of the unreleased DLC, or allowing customers the option to refund the entire Season Pass. For the purposes of refunds, the value of unreleased DLC will be
Oh, the entire Season Pass. That's the thing that hurts. That does a big hour.
Decided in a discussion with Valve. I absolutely love that line of, if you're not ready to share details about that content, then you're not ready to sell it to the customers. There have been so many companies that have been the tail wagging the dog. They have all these grand designs for things that they're planning on doing in the future. They're giving all these empty promises to their audience, and they don't even know if they even have a game that's worth it in the first place. Look at that Unknown 9 game. They had an entire cinematic universe. They had a novel, a web series, a podcast, all kinds of other things that were planned, and they didn't even know if they had a game that players even wanted. Turns out they didn't. Developers are going to hate this. Being held accountable not only with their reputation.
No, I disagree with this. Only shitty developers will hate this. Only developers who actually acted upon their worst thing, their worst instinct. Most of the time, I'm sure there will be some points of it where it will hit an innocent or someone who actually tries to do a good game and just mismanage his time. But it's a handful of people, a handful of developers. I personally think that 9 out of 10 times, if you have a good developer, he already upholds this stuff like the Holy Grail. It's only shitty developers who will hate this.
But now also financially held accountable by Steam. If you don't deliver, we're going to refund it. I love it. Over the last few years, we've had so many issues where the players were the ones that were taking the brunt of these issues, of their mistakes. We're the ones that have been held accountable for their mistakes because we paid for these games. And they are the ones that just get to walk away from it in some cases. No more of that. No more appealing to our empathy.
Specifically on Steam. Not on Epic Games Store, not on the other. There was a different thing. I don't remember what it was. Not on any of that. Specifically on Steam. Remember that.
Because you can't deliver. Steam steps in front of it and says, no. If you can't make it on time, if you can't tell them what's in it, then you're not going to sell it. Or we're going to refund it. You know, I realize now that just recently Ubisoft said that they are not going to do a Season Pass model for Assassin's Creed Shadows, even though they were going to before this announcement took place.
Oh.
Coincidence? I think
No.
not. I love the
Perfect
idea
timing.
of transparency and us being able to know what we're actually buying and when we're actually going to get it, because I want to have faith that I am going to get what I pay for. And a change like this helps make that happen. I love how much influence Steam has over their platform, but I don't really like how much influence they have over the entire industry. In this case, I do, because a change like this is actually going to protect consumers regardless of whatever platform they're on,
That's
just
true.
because of how popular Steam is. So many.
No, it does matter on which platform it is. If you buy from the Ubisoft store directly, this won't apply. Maybe I misunderstood him, maybe, but remember, maybe, and it could be that somebody else misunderstands him just as I did right now. No, it only applies to Steam, that's not everywhere, so please be watchful. And I am actually not a big advocate of just purely buying on one platform, but give me a reason not to at this point.
Many developers want to put their games on Steam, so they're going to have to, stay copacetic no matter what platform they're on, because they have to follow Steam's rules.
Yep.
You're not just going to do one thing on Steam and not do it for the other players. Otherwise, that's going to put you in a pretty sticky situation. And I think that's what a lot of these developers have been trying to avoid. They don't want to get sued for this kind of stuff, because I don't think a lot of people realize this, but in a lot of cases with some of these laws, they don't become laws until somebody goes to court over it, and then a law gets created for it. And I think a lot of these developers have been trying to avoid that because they like how underregulated this industry is.
Yep.
I've said it before, I'll say it again. It's like the Wild West, and they get away with murder out here, and they're going to continue to until somebody else holds them accountable, and in this case, it's Steam. But there needs to be laws in place. Rules need to be stricter than what they actually are right now, because in a lot of cases, we are not protected. And one of the issues that we're still facing today is the fact that we can buy something, and they can just take it away.
Yep.
With so many games going live service and continually updating themselves, one of my biggest concerns is the loss of content later on down the road, even though the game is still available. This has been a massive problem over the last few years and has been met with considerable pushback from the players. However, there is nothing that is standing in the way of developers continuing to...
By the way, the pushback of the players is relatively irrelevant. As long as people still pay it, it won't matter. But, I mean, this could be a step in the right direction.
Take away what we paid for with no recourse. A great example of this issue is Destiny 2. Back in 2020, Bungie introduced the Destiny Content Vault, DCV, an initiative to manage the game's growing size by removing older content to make room for newer expansions. What made this especially controversial was the fact that it included content that players had paid for, like the Forsaken expansion. Forsaken was one of the most beloved expansions. It featured a campaign, it had locations like the Tangled Shore, and a fan-favorite raid in The Last Wish. When Bungie vaulted that content, players lost access to a product that they had spent money on, and there was no option for refunds or alternative
And yet, people still play it.
access. Bungie justified the move by citing technical limitations, but to the players, this was just taking away something that you had already paid for, to give you more things for you to be able to pay for. The benefit here solely falls with the developer and not with the customer.
Yep.
What's wild about all of this is that soon after, Bungie announced that they would no longer vault expansions following the backlash, but this was just them plainly admitting that it was never necessary in the first place. The vaulting of content, from my perspective, was nothing more than them fabricating a need to buy more content. It undermines the trust and highlights just how fragile the concept of ownership is.
And yet, people still play it.
In digital gaming, when you pay for content, you expect it to remain available as long as the game itself is online. But Destiny 2 proved that that's not a guarantee. Then we have Overwatch. Blizzard took things to a whole new level when they outright replaced the original Overwatch with Overwatch 2. If you had bought the first game, too bad. It's gone. Blizzard not only removed the game from availability, but fundamentally changed its structure, switching to a free-to-play model and incorporating a battle pass and microtransactions. While Overwatch 2 brought some improvements, many players were angry about the fact that they had lost the game that they had paid for in the first place.
And yet, people still play it.
Especially since
not as many, but
some of the modes and features didn't make it in the transition. On top of that, the planned content for Overwatch 2, the only reason why players could even get hyped for it in the first place, like the highly anticipated PvE hero missions, was delayed repeatedly and eventually scaled back and then never delivered as promised. Both of these are cases that underline a disturbing trend, the idea that what you pay for is no longer permanent. Whether it's due to technical issues, business decisions, or simple neglect, we're seeing more and more examples of games taking away content or failing to deliver it altogether, and consumers are the ones that are left holding the bag. This isn't just frustrating, it's predatory. When we buy a game or a season pass, we are making an investment, not only in the product, but the idea that the developer and publisher will honor their commitments. And when they don't, what is the recourse? What do we actually have? What can we actually do? Because for all of the pushback and outrage, the reality is that legislators and storefronts like Steam, Xbox, and PlayStation haven't done enough to protect the players, haven't done enough to protect the customers. Steam's new rules on season passes are a great step forward, but they only address one part of a much larger problem. There needs to be stricter enforcement on delivering content and keeping the content that players have paid for. Something ensuring that in some way, if something is removed from a game, that it remains accessible in some form, or players get an immediate refund. Personally, I don't think that developers should be allowed to vault content customers have paid for, but for whatever reason, if there is no other choice and the developer wants to do that, they should be required to offer some type of offline version or a way for players to access it through archives.
Yep.
This could be handled through cloud storage or downloadable assets, but there needs to be something there to ensure that players aren't left with nothing. I also think that platforms should demand greater transparency from the developers. Any content that might be removed in the future should be labeled clearly as such at the point of purchase. This way, players can make an informed decision when they're making that purchase, whether or not they want to take that risk. As we push further into an era that's dominated by live service games and digital-only content, these issues are only going to become more prevalent. Without stronger consumer protections, this cycle of broken promises and lost purchases is going to continue. That's bad for everyone, not just the players. It erodes our trust in the industry. It makes it where we're going to be less likely to want to invest in these games, and ultimately, it's going to hurt the developers and publishers who are trying to do things the right way. Transparency, accountability, and consumer protection shouldn't be optional. They should be the standard. Now, I want you guys to keep...
I agree with him on this one. Again, I just agree with him.
Keep in mind that there's nothing stopping any of these companies from taking away the things that you buy. Because in their eyes, you don't own a damn thing. And that's just the way that this industry is now. I'm happy that there's some states that are out there that are actually notifying customers, putting up signs saying you're not buying a video game, you're buying a license to play a video game. But this issue is just going to get worse as time goes on. They're going to start taking things away. They're going to shut more games down. They're going to take content out of games. They're going to do all kinds of things that you're not going to be happy with. And it doesn't matter. They already got your money. That's it. I think it's one of the reasons why we see a lot of companies that are out there is trying to switch to like live service and free to play, is because there's a lot of freedom in that, because you can't complain about it. You didn't pay for anything. So if they take something out of it, it is what it is. While we don't have a lot of examples of games that have like vaulted content like Destiny or Overwatch or something like that, I think we're going to be seeing more of that stuff in the future, and it's just because a lot of these live service games are still relatively young.
And by the way, this will happen definitively as long as they can get away with it.
Part of the industry, this new era of the industry that we're in, is relatively young, and there's not a lot of litigation that prevents...
Oh, give me a second. I just have to point this out, just in case you didn't see it.
These companies from doing a lot of things that put us at risk. And that's one of the reasons why we have to step forward. We have to talk about these kind of things, and we have to make these issues known, because this is the time to get ahead of it.
That's true.
We don't want to be talking and, complaining about these things 10 years down the road when it's far worse than what it actually is today.
He's also correct about it. And if you only focus on the cat, I understand why.
So this is a really important discussion. I'm really happy that Steam made these changes. But, like Steam, outside of like DRM, they are one of the few companies that in a lot of cases usually stand up for their customers. Because if you make a platform for your customers, who would have guessed it, they actually use it. Maybe try to think about that, Epic. But with that said, I think that there's still a lot of rules that need to be put in place. I think there's a lot of different areas in which we are still incredibly vulnerable when it comes to some of these companies. Another one of the things to look at is early access. Well, I've had a lot of success in early access. I've had a lot of really great games that I've played. Balatro, Baldur's Gate 3, Pal World, Hades. There's a ton of different ones that I've had a great time with. it's still an area in which a lot of companies and a lot of developers could come in and make a lot of promises and never deliver upon it. And what are we going to be left with? Now, mind you, they actually have a warning that pops up to tell you that, hey, things might change and yada, yada, yada. But at the same time, I still feel like if you're going to be selling the game for as much as some of these early access versions of these games are, there needs to be some contingencies in place.
I mean, early access is a hard nut to crack, because there could be a situation where you just say, oh, I totally hate this idea, I'm gonna do something different. Yeah, but it's also not that often. So
and I feel like in some cases, just like with the season pass and the DLC, Steam might need to sit down with some of these different developers and go, hey, what's your timeline looking like? Because the last thing you want to do is have a game that's in early access for like 10 years or something like that, or never even actually comes out in the first place.
No, there also should be a specific timeline for our early access game. If you're going in early access, you should have a maximum of time where you just have to release it. That's also shitty for indie devs, but I don't know. Okay, I don't know about this point, maybe.
But yeah, it's great to see a change like this, but I'm still really worried that there's a lot of areas in which we're not protected and we need to be, and it sucks that there's really not anybody that's out there that's a voice for us in the first place. And I'm talking about outside of social media, right? Like, there's plenty of people online that will talk about these things, myself, Asmongold, a few other people as well, but there's nobody in government that really understands a lot of these issues, and probably not going to...
Because remember, all of those people can talk about it, but as long as there aren't any actual government-placed things, like laws, it won't do anything, or a minimum.
Gonna see anybody like that for at least a few more years until I guess some of us gamers grow up and get responsible. I mean, we already did the grow up part. Well, the grow old part. Anyway, let me know what you guys think about all of this. I wanted to keep this relatively short, but I love to see a change like this. I want to see more changes like this in the future, and these are really important topics for us to discuss, so make sure you guys are talking about this with people. If you guys enjoyed the video, share it.
Yeah. Leave a like, sub, the shebang, and show me and Legendary Drops some love, because he does really, really good work here. And yes, I'm still gonna do it while I'm actually watched a freaking cat. And yeah, Acolytes, as it is, remember this face, and good night.